I think it's probably best for us to start with a reintroduction as to who you are. It's been over a year since you've been here last, and you're wearing a different hat right now than last time we saw you up here.
Yeah, the last time I was here, I was working for Levin Land and Housing Coalition and for Emerge, so two different hats. But of those, neither has been the hat that I'm wearing today, which is the Asylum Seekers Solidarity Collective, which is the group of folks I've been organizing with throughout that entire period of time. And so we've just kind of formalized into calling ourselves a collective. We're not a nonprofit. We're not an organization out of anything other than volunteers at this moment. But yeah, so that's who I'm here as today.
Could you tell us a little bit about Asylum Solidarity Collective?
Yeah, so we like to say that we found each other in being squeaky wheels. My friend and colleague, Alyssa, who used to be a director at Emerge and then has worked in national organizations and is currently at Together Lab, is one of the co-founders, as well as my friends Kellyanne and Natalie, who are a couple who have been doing solidarity work with the International Migrants Alliance, with CAUSA, a lot of different organizations over the years. And we all kind of found each other in a moment of trying to get support and funding and legislation and progress passed for recently arrived neighbors. And we've just kind of stuck together because we found that we're stronger together. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So maybe we should talk about really quickly what exactly Asylum Solidarity Collective does.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
We are doing a little bit of everything, it feels like, and it kind of fluctuates. I think part of our intention of not being a nonprofit or an organization has been that we can be adaptable to what is needed at the moment. So we've been the organization who's been the first contact for a lot of recently arrived folks when they get here. They call us, and then we put them on wait lists or help them find shelter. We also have been the folks who advocated for a statewide bill and also advocated for the county funding that came through that you all were a part of last spring in the annual budget for the county. So yeah, so we're kind of like both advocating for the resources to be available, accompanying the folks and organizing amongst them, and then kind of being like available to talk about best practices once those things are passed. And
yeah. Well, speaking of squeaky wheels, just a quick recap from the church side of that whole situation. Some of you were here, and some of you were not here yet. It was Easter Sunday. Easter Sunday when I was standing right here, and I had the pleasure of sharing with us what kind of Easter we were looking at that day. Was it going to be one where we are building emergency Red Cross shelters, or one where we get to go home with our families? And I had been notified by somebody who is a part of the county and everybody with Asylum Solidarity that the work that we had showed up for week after week after week at the courthouse paid off, and they extended housing finances for people in emergency shelters, asylum seekers in emergency shelters in particular, by 1 week. We had an Easter miracle for one more week of housing, right? And then what happened with that 1 week? It turned into 1 month. And then what happened with that 1 month?
well, we're still in it now.
We're still in it.
Yeah, the county passed funding to house folks. We're still kind of working through the logistics of where and how that will work. Of course, the new administration is shaping our thinking. But families, as many families as we could get in, as we can afford to get in, we're getting into shelter right now. Still. United Way came alongside us. The county stepped in. We had donors from community step in.
Yeah. There were many weeks when we were the only the only church community present. And there were also many weeks when we weren't. You know, we had Covenant Presbyterian 50 blocks away joining us too. And neither church is huge. We're not mega churches. But along with our asylum-seeking friends and neighbors who were bold in the face of a terrifying prospect of being kicked out into the streets, something unthinkable happens. Our own little Easter miracle. Today, it's important to me that I remember things like that sometimes people in power can be budged, even by little tiny churches. Small but mighty. And I suppose a grassroots organization that is not a nonprofit as well. Yeah. How did that feel for you guys?
It was huge because we didn't have institutional support. We had.
Can everybody hear Alyssa well?
Can you hear me?
No. Okay. Sorry.
Sorry, I'll talk louder. It was huge because we had community and we had you all. We had individuals who were willing to be brave and step out. And one of the things we heard early on, like through the whispers that we had connections with in the county, was that, oh, those asylum seekers, they're getting organized and we need to be prepared. We need to plan something. And that was because people showed up.
Yeah.
So.
And behind the scenes, after, like, you guys kept working.
Yes.
You kept working when we were like, all right, what else can we do? Do you need us to show back up somewhere? Like, nah, we're doing like the paper side of things. You guys can do what do you call it? A sacred pause or a holy pause?
Yeah, evaluation. Tell me what came out of that.
Honestly, I think we could have done more intentional evaluating work ourselves. I could have led more intentional evaluating work. But our restorative justice team did continue to meet, and we talked about things that worked well for us as a church community and things that didn't. And we decided, like, some of the organizations we worked with maybe didn't need us like we thought they would need us, or maybe like they thought they would need us. But Asylum Solidarity put us to work. And then we had another grassroots organization come and knock on our door and show up in large, well, 4 people. 4 people feels like a lot, you know, 4 organizers showing up fairly regularly and spending time with us. We can't do everything. That was one of the things that we talked about. And if I'm going to be honest, I think I have to acknowledge that there's some discomfort in not doing everything, because I still care very much about gun reform. I still care very much about eco-justice, you know, but we may be mighty, but we're also finite.
Human. Mm-hmm.
We're human.
It's on my list of things to make sure I tell you all today.
Okay, great. So let's start by, let's start. We're way into this conversation now. My notes say let's start, but let's address the elephant in the room. Someone was elected into office who, in addition to other things, has vilified immigrants and especially asylum seekers. Yeah. So how are you doing, Alyssa? And how are your fellow organizers?
We're not great. We're afraid. We're really afraid. And I think the fear is different for different people. You know, we have people in our community who organize alongside us who are immigrant folks themselves. We have people who have family members who will be impacted. We have folks who are LGBTQ identifying and feel unsafe. And I think maybe for me, the biggest fear I have is that this is not our first go around and people will get tired and people will be quiet and people will decide that it's easier to just let it happen. And that's a big fear I have.
Now, when you say let it happen, hold on a second before you say anything.
Yeah.
Brianna, could we have that tissue box over here?
Good to have.
This is just in case. Thank you.
Precautionary tissues. I love it.
Yeah. Just in case tissues.
Yeah.
You said let it happen.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean by it?
I think that there's two sides of how I want to talk about this, because on the one hand, I don't want to cause so much fear and angst that we really do fall into the, like, it's too hard, it's too big, we can't. And I think it's really important that we're grounded in the reality, and we have someone who will be putting policies in place that are cruel. And the cruelty is the point, and we know that because that's how that administration operated previously. And I think we know that there are many communities that will be targeted, that gun rights will go, that gun rights, that climate, that LGBTQ issues, that reproductive rights, all of those issues will be impacted. And we also know that immigrant community is the easiest target and the first that will be impacted. And the most vulnerable among them are asylum seekers, simply because they've been vilified publicly. They are what he ran on, and he has been really clear that he will work to get people deported as quickly as possible. So for folks who have to check in because of their legal status with immigration and customs enforcement, that's who will be detained and deported first.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's interesting, just to put it very lightly, that we've gone in this country from vilifying undocumented migrants to also vilifying people who have gone through legal processes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
People who have gone in through a port of entry and declared the desire to seek asylum here under a qualifying category.
I had a friend who emailed me this week who works in the refugee community himself as a refugee, and he was sharing an article that Lindsey Graham is like already preparing legislation for removing birthright citizenship. Like, it's not, there's always going to be a next step in the planning. There will always be a next category to vilify in order to consolidate power, which is the strategy that they will use.
Yeah. So, have you heard from the asylum seekers or some of the asylum seekers you're working with?
Mm-hmm.
How are they doing with this?
I think that there's a lot of uncertainty. I think this is a community of folks who have been told to trust the government, to turn themselves in, to give their documentation, to share their information, to show up to meetings with the promise of receiving support and help and a status and next steps. And I think it's a really sharp awakening to realize that it isn't just like insidious microaggression racism that's going to be present, that they will be actually targeted. And so we're working on Know Your Rights workshops specific to this community, because unlike undocumented folks or refugees, this is like a middle territory of people who don't have status yet, but have been promised status if they keep following this checklist of actions. And so they have more trust than an undocumented person does in a system that roundly does not have their best interests at heart. And they also do not have the protections that refugee community members traditionally have. So they're really afraid. When we asked a few weeks ago what they'd been hearing a lot of like, well, what if I have a baby that's born here? They'll take the baby from me and send me back. There's a lot of fear of family separation. There's a lot of exhaustion. Like, I worked so hard and took so many risks to get here. And it's like watching all of the doors shut while you're literally sitting in the space.
Yeah, it's gutting for me to think about Cleaver and Edimar, who had a conversation with us once upon a time in the spring. And their little ones And I remember Cleaver telling us about what they endured on their way to even get to our country. They left Venezuela, and you don't leave your country unless it's the mouth of a shark, right? As Lori just read for us. And they went through the Darien Gap, one of the most dangerous places on earth, for hundreds of years. And they spoke about how they had seen people dying left and right as they came up here. But they were so hopeful, you know? We still text each other, Cleaver and I, and I don't have great news for him this week, you know. So, are there any fears that you're hearing about that are legitimate and maybe haven't been articulated just yet?
I mean, there's enormous fears across the board.
Yeah.
I think the first ones are family separation and deportation for this community. And I also think there are a whole lot of communities who have a lot of fears right now.
And you don't think that's just rhetoric?
No.
Okay. Why don't you think that's rhetoric?
Because last time they had a plan, and it was a rapidly thrown together plan, and you all probably remember the first days of the presidency, how it was just like one intense action after another, and like the rollout was so sudden and so quick that it was really hard to figure out. It's like a dam collapsing. You can't like put your finger in every hole, and so people got overwhelmed really quickly. And I think that they've had 4 years to plan, and we've seen some of those plans already articulated. But I also know that specific to the work that I do, this is just the community who they've built their entire campaign on. So that's who they'll come for first.
Yeah.
And I want to say first, because I think that's actually the message I want to share most, is that we need each other. I think that it's beautiful and important to name that, like, our historical faith tradition has taught us that we are to welcome the stranger in our land, and we need them every bit as much as they need us right now, because what they are experiencing is only the first of what could happen. And I think that, like, if there's initial resistance there, it slows down the process for every other person of the awful things that could happen to people. If you want to make sure that you're protecting everyone's rights, you stand with everyone whose rights are being impacted.
Yeah.
And even today, just sitting here, as you all were coming up to me and saying, I don't understand why this is so awful, and like wishing me courage. And I realized I needed you all as much as you all might have wanted me to be here today. And I think that that's going to be a really important thing for us all to remember, how badly we need each other.
Yeah. They came for the Jews, and I said nothing, because I was not a Jew.
Exactly.
They came for the Catholics, and I said nothing, because I was not a Catholic. And then they came for me.
There was no one left to speak.
And there was no one else left to speak.
Exactly.
Well, that does remind me that this is not the first time.
Yeah.
This is not the first time that we've seen threats to marginalized communities or scapegoating. And while I'm very frustrated and disappointed in the state of the Christian church right now around the country, it's not every Christian church. It's just some of the Christian churches. And just like there was a confessing church in Germany that Dietrich Bonhoeffer and Karl Barth and other folks were a part of who resisted, we have a history of resistance too. No.
And I think, I was actually thinking about that on my way over here. Like, we have the Bonhoeffers, and we have, the Mother Teresas, and we have the Rosa Parkses, and we have the Harriet Tubmans, like these historical figures who we look to. But we also have, like, the Erica Martins, who, was unwilling to let that space not be used for the neighbors that were already sleeping outside. We have like the Clays and Sharons who showed up consistently at the county, like insisting that the county commissioners listen to the people who are present. We have you who, like in your previous congregation, insisted on letting people hold space and make their own decision about choosing a name that was more affirming of their beliefs in their community. And I would just be really reticent to let anyone in this community think that their own individual power is not going to be important right now. Because that many lights shining is hard to put out.
Let it shine. That's what it says at the top of this.
You're going to need your neighbors that we shine. You're going to need the family members, honestly, that are hard to talk to right now. I think that is, I was at a birthday party last night listening to some of my friends, and all of them were talking about how hard it was to talk to X, Y, or Z person in their family right now.
Yeah.
And I think two things that come to mind with that are that, like, do not give up your power before you have to. Like, do not capitulate. Do not, like, what is the word I'm looking for? Like, do not give in before you have to, you know? And I think the part of that means that we have to keep voicing what we actually really do believe and who we really are for, and that we really do believe in belonging, and that we really do all need each other, and naming that we will never accept cruelty. And I think that's something you can say, like, in the face of anybody who is in your circle who maybe is suffering right now, but also something you could say to anybody in your circle who is, like, celebrating right now. Like, we will never accept the cruelty, and othering is how we build our own well-being.
Yeah. Boy, why do we do elections so close to Thanksgiving and Christmas, right?
Maybe that's why.
Maybe. So what does our partnership with Asylum Solidarity look like right now?
I'm going to say the very first thing that I want you all to do is to actually be in your feelings. And I know that that feels like kind of wasteful, but we learned a lot from last time, right? We learned a lot in 2016. And I will say some of us jumped to action really quickly and did all the women's marches and showed up for, like, rapid response things and had our stress levels so elevated that, like, every white van had me, like, activated, you know? And I think this time we need to be a little bit more strategic and more intentional. So there's this great article by Daniel Hunter, and I'll send it to you that you can share with everybody. But one of the first things he says is, like, we're going to need to learn to trust our own selves and our gut a little bit about, like, what we can personally do. And part of that means actually sitting with your gut, and that means actually, like, feeling your feelings and grieving. And I will tell you that for me personally, that is very hard. And I have been working very hard this week, as Giuseppe knows, to, like, not go places and do things rather than feel my feelings. And I think that is just something I really want to encourage you all to do, like, to just sit and feel the pain, because the same amount of pain that you feel is the same amount of courage that you're going to be able to have going forward. And if you feel it now, you're going to remember that when you're why you're standing in what you're standing in.
I think we're going to need to continue to speak, like,
louder,
yeah.
Okay. Another thing that I think is really important is we learned, like, action for action's sake wasn't helpful. We learned, like, symbolic actions, like virtue signaling, also not necessarily helpful. We need to, like, listen to the folks who are being impacted first and follow their lead. So what we're hearing right now is, like, people don't know what to expect, so that's why we're building our Know Your Rights workshops that we're building. And I think the part that I said earlier, the self-censoring, that's the word I was looking for, like making sure that we're not self-censoring in advance. And when people are like, how are you doing? Be like, yeah, this is really awful. This is really hard. I'm seeing really hard things or hearing really hard things are coming for people I care about.
Can I share a story about that real quick?
Yeah, of course.
I was talking to a family member on Thursday, right before our Morning Connect group, and he asked how I was doing, and well, no, I asked him how he was doing, and he told me, and then I asked, how are you doing with the election results? He said, oh, I don't let politics determine how I feel, how I experience the world. How are you doing? I'm like, well, I guess I do let politics affect how I experience the world. But in my privilege, that's my choice to be able to do that. But there's a lot of folks that I care about who don't have that privilege of opting out of how they're experiencing it. He said, well, what do you mean? And he was genuinely interested. He hadn't thought about any of this.
No.
I shared with him, and we had like this unexpectedly deep and beautiful conversation.
And there's going to be strange alliances that take place, I think, over the next few years, right? There's going to be people that you don't expect to actually move. And I'd be really reticent to write off those people because we're going to need everybody. There's some people you'll never be able to move, and you can still hold the line that we don't lead with cruelty, but there's people who we can move still. And I think that's actually the thing that I would ask when you mentioned, like, oh, we could have done a better job of evaluation. I think
I could have done it. Yeah.
But like maybe that is actually the thing this community can be doing right now. We have 68 days, right? And so in these 68 days, feel your feelings. Keep checking your emails because we're going to keep sending updates of what we're learning and seeing and hearing and ways to get connected. But also in the meantime, how are you all weaving a strong enough community that can show up so that it's not just like 2 people or 6 people, but it's like as many of you who can get there. And if someone can't drive, we're picking that person up. And then maybe we're bringing our grandkids because those grandkids are the ones who are going to be impacted by these policies. Like, how are we weaving deeper connections and talking about how this is impacting us and how much we're going to need each other, so that when I call Parkrose UCC, I know I'm not just getting Giuseppe, I'm getting all of you in that room. That's what I need right now. That's what the next 2 months look like for me, is how do you build power among yourselves so that when, like, because power depends on like an inverted pyramid, and we can go into depth about this some other time, but they depend on all of us supporting like the structures, and that's power in any situation. And when there's like a mass of people who will resist or slow that down or not hold up the system that's cruel and is hurting people, that pyramid topples. It's a very small point that it's balanced on.
Yeah. I have more questions I want to ask, but I think in this moment it may be more important, the last 2 minutes we have, to maybe get questions that are out here.
Sure.
Steve, would you mind walking the mic around? What questions do you have for Alyssa? Raise your hands. Okay. Let's start with Diana and then Rita. Steve's bringing a mic.
Oh, okay, thank you. I wanted to ask about ICE.
Mm-hmm.
Some years ago, a few years ago, we got training to accompany people who were at risk to be picked up off the street, out of cars, and taken away, some of them to prisons. Have you heard anything about that arm of the government?
Yeah, and there's a group of folks who, like a subset of all of the work that's happening is a group of folks who are working on deportation defense. And so I think one of the places that you could plug in if you are really wanting to accompany people like who do have to go to court or who do want to have like a next, or do have to have another interaction, with the legal system. And Emerge has a really solid accompaniment program where you can get trained on how to do that, and that is a really great place to get training. So I would recommend that you check that out.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And that's Emerge, IMIRJ.
You have a flyer of it over here, I noticed.
We do, yes.
How you pronounce your name now? First name, Alyssa?
Alyssa, yeah.
Alyssa. Well, you know what's bothering me? I know they're trying to keep illegal drugs out of here and people that's illegally getting over here to sell them. And our people are dying from this fentanyl, this other terrible drugs, which it all should be addressed by putting more security on the border and have drones flying over, because I learned and seen tunnels being dug so they get through with the drugs. But this kind of bothers me. Now, I hope this trying to deport immigrants and asylum seekers, I hope it's not, I hope the person that's having that's in their mind is not getting confused with the legal immigrants and asylum seekers over here. This poor lady I saw on the news washing her plate says she's fear of being deported, and her family's right there, and it just got me in my stomach.
Yeah, Rita, thanks for sharing that, because that's actually, if you don't mind.
Oh, I'm very much looking forward to hearing what you might say. Thank you, Rita.
I think that one of the things that we see is that people get lumped in together a lot. Like what you're describing, like you're worried about the person who you saw who was just washing dishes and trying to take care of her loved people, and I think also there's kind of this narrative out here about like who's a good immigrant and a bad immigrant, and I would say that a lot of the people who have been involved in drug trade and whatnot in other countries have also been working with parts of our own government. Our own government has made that possible. And so there's a flow that's happened over the years where our government has both taken advantage of the places where those folks are from and also has actually been part of the process of distribution of drug trafficking. There's some really great reporting about this, actually.
Well, and it goes back long before Trump's administration.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Like early 2000s, like Bush administration, like the war on drugs. And so there's some really great articles that you can read about it. But I think one of the important things to remember here is like that is like a perfect example of how people will choose cruel policies and justify it because they'll make you think, well, it's us or them. It's like our youth who are, using fentanyl, or it's these migrants who are coming in here and bringing it with them. And I just want us to remember that that is by and large not the case, but also every single person has a story, and every single person has a reason they've chosen what they've chosen. And I think that like to have that solidarity, how do we move together in a way that is not attacking generally, like recently arrived folks because we're afraid of drugs? And so I think one of the things that's going to be really important going forward is like, how do we think of homeless migrant families and homeless American families as the same thing, because we're all here in America together? And how do we make sure that we're putting policies in place that mean that no child sleeps outside, regardless of whatever choices or things that have happened in their parents' lives?
Right.
So I think it's going to be really important when you hear narratives like that to take a moment and be like, do I actually know that to be true of people I know? We know drugs are here. We know our own government has been complicit in bringing them here. And we also know that by and large, the people who are arriving here are not the people who are looking for drug use. They're the folks who are washing dishes and trying to survive. And so don't let those narratives like guide your thinking about people, because we all do belong to each other.
Well, let's go back to the scripture really quick, Travis, if you don't mind. When an alien, a stranger in your land, somebody who's from another country, resides with you in your lands, you shall not oppress the alien, the person from another country. Notice there's no caveat. There's no like immigration status being talked about here or anything like that. There's no discussion about process. The alien who resides with you shall be to you as the native born among you. You shall love the alien as yourself, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. This is Leviticus, I have this written down.
1933 through 34.
Yeah. I find myself so frustrated by folks who embrace hatred and embrace fear of the other as a Christian value. But folks, that's not the Christ that we follow. We can do better. It will cost us something.
I think that's one thing I've been thinking about is like, I think American Christianity has gotten to be a little lazy over the last years. And I don't mean that to you all. I just mean that like we've not had to actually stand in our values and in the words of the scripture that mean to stand and fight for people and to not other people. And we're going to have to work that muscle really hard. Like I would spend the next 68 days working that muscle, and like every time you hear a news story that you think, oh yeah, like there they are again trying to make the other look scary. They're trying to make me be afraid. I want you to remember the Eddies and Cleavers who have been in your church. I want you to remember like the children like who come and play like from the group that stays here after schools. And the
Wellness Wednesdays.
Yeah, the Wellness Wednesdays. And like unhoused families coming here to get food and services. And I want you to hold on to that and remember that there's a lot of beautiful unity that exists that is not the focus of the news. And so just hold on to that. Hold on to that, because we're going to have to hold on to each other now.
Alyssa, we're going to call it here.
Okay.
It is about 34 minutes into our conversation, so I'll let it go a little extra. Yes, Anne.
Time ago, which was the whole brown eye, blue eye experiment that a teacher did in an elementary school. And the amazing part was this very same people that were so upset, pained about how they were treated were perfectly willing to do the same thing to the other people. And a lot of this, I felt, came from the construct of the experiment, where people were excluded from eating first, from drinking out of certain water fountains. They had to go much further, or maybe couldn't even get water at all. So the tendency to be jealous is so intrinsic to living creatures. I have 2 dogs, and if I pet one, the other one is crazy with jealousy, will just jump all over the place. So I don't think it's restricted to humans. I think it's just kind of the way of things, nature in living creatures, that they don't want, nobody wants to feel excluded. Nobody wants to feel left out. So I think what we need to do more is to start working as we can with social constructs, so that there isn't red lines on housing, there isn't exclusion from employment, there isn't exclusion on grants and other things that allow some people to move up and others to be left behind.
I love that. That's actually part of why we asked all of you to come and give testimony in the spring, was because we actually believe that no child should be outside, right? It was visibilized by these dozens of asylum-seeking families, but there are dozens of U.S.-born or undocumented families who are also in the same situation and who maybe weren't as visible because they knew where to hide. And I think that the more we can stand together in our power and remember that like there's not an us and a them, there's a we, and what kind of a world do we want to construct together, like you're saying?
I think the changes are necessary, and we need to acknowledge the history.
Yep.
This isn't new.
Yeah.
Well, and some of us have been talking about how we, as a church, need to continue some education around this too, because we all have growing edges, right? And it does include that systematic piece in so many different areas. Thank you so much for your time, everybody.